these churches who have sponsored this event, they are praying about fighting, praying about homelessness, praying about depression. And I want to share an example here that tackles all three of those. And before I get to the specifics of this example, I wanted to share with you an idiom that's in American culture. I'm not sure if this is over there in England, but there's this idea of being either a glass half full person or a glass half empty person. And if you're a glass half empty person, it means you're, a negative thinker. You're looking at your lot in life or your cup in life and you're saying, oh, look at the lack there. And if you're a positive thinker, you might focus on the good that's there. Well, at least I've got some water, right? And sometimes people think of religion as just positive thinking, being grateful for the good that you have. But today what I'm going to share through this lens of Christian Science, it's so much more than that. And I was thinking a while back when I had a glass of water in my hand, I don't care about how much water is in my cup at the moment. What I care about is whether I have an infinite source of water nearby. Now I have a tap, a faucet nearby, and I can just walk over there and turn on the faucet and just let this cup overflow anytime I want. And I know exactly where that faucet is, and that provides me a sense of security and safety. And I don't have to worry about how much good I see on the surface, how much supply I have, because I know where supply comes from. And if that supply ever dried out, if I had no water access in this apartment, then I would be in trouble and I would really... But that's not the case. I always know where this infinite tap is. And in a similar way, what we're going to do in this lecture is we're going to see that no matter on what we see on the surface of our life, whether there's a lot of good or we're still struggling to obtain good in our life, once we learn where the source of good comes from, where the source of health comes from, where the source of life comes from, and we understand how to get there, how to fill up our cup, how to let it overflow, so to speak, then we're going to feel an amazing amount of security and wholeness and just being at home. I feel at home in this apartment, partly because I have that security of water here anytime, right? Well, so when I was in college, I started to ask myself all these big questions about how I can do good in my own life, how I could make a difference. Like all of us, I think all of us have this heart of good inside of us, that we want to feel purpose-driven. We want to feel of use. And I was asking myself how I could do that, and I started to dabble into politics, into environmentalism, and I made some good impact through some of those things. I had some jobs in those areas. But there was always a deeper yearning that I had. Is there a God out there? Is there really a divine purpose to my life? And is there more than just kind of tinkering with things on the surface in life? Is there a way to feel and discover God, to truly feel whole and healthy and understand my reason for existing and live it out? And I was asking all those big questions, and I started to study spirituality and religion in a deep and profound way. I not only majored in it in college, but when my classes were over, I would go home and I would just be reading other spiritual books. I really wanted to know the answers to the deep questions in life. And I studied the saints and the sages and the yogis from all the different traditions, anyone who claimed to know absolute truth. And I was kind of cherry-picking from a lot of different wonderful teachers and spiritual traditions. And I wasn't expecting to find one perspective that would be the end-all for me. But I came across this book called Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, written by this remarkable woman named Mary Baker Eddy, who, following in the footsteps of Jesus, was able to heal people through prayer. But what was interesting is that even though she became an incredibly successful healer, in fact, there's a lot of books about her. There's one like this called Christian Healer. It catalogs over 300 healings that came about through her individual practice. And, they weren't just everyday healings. If you look in the back of this book, there's a index that says healings, and or you can look under healings in the index. And if you just start at the beginning, There's a case that she healed an abscess in the eye, an actor, adultery, agony in a woman's face, many animal cases, lame arm, a paralyzed arm, assassin with a gun, bird's broken leg, blindness, another case of blindness, blood poisoning, boil on a girl's head, bowel disease, bowel stoppage, brain fever, broken limbs, several cases, bronchial affection, bully at school. That's not even all the A's and B's. And so this woman, Mary Baker Eddy, was an incredibly successful healer through prayer alone. But she didn't walk around saying, I'm this successful healer and come to me and that's all I have to offer in my life, just my own accolades and my own healing ability. She talked again and again in her writings as the discoverer of Christian Science. She felt she had discovered something so much more than any personal demonstration of healing. She felt she discovered the science of what you could call the Christ, that power and love behind the life of Jesus that allowed him to help and heal people. And that's what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about the logic or the science, the how-to behind how to pray and heal that was discovered by this woman, Mary Baker Eddy, and since has been practiced successfully around the world for the last 150 years. And there's just an amazing amount of literature about this. You can jump on christianscience.com or jsh.christianscience.com and find testimonies around the world of people who have healed life's most difficult problems through this prayer practice. Now, when I was in college asking all those questions, and I came across this book, Science and Health, I read it. This is the textbook of Christian Science, and it felt like a coming home experience. It felt like things I'd always known deep down inside, but I had never heard articulated so beautifully and sublimely and thoroughly. And as I read this book, just wonderful things started to happen to me. I had a really bad injury of my shoulder when I was a kid, and I was on all these travel teams when I was young, baseball and soccer and basketball, and it was my whole life. And this doctor told me I couldn't play any sports anymore that had to do with my shoulder. And I was heartbroken. My life shifted at that point to doing some more music and other things, but that was always in the background and followed me even until I was in college. And when I started reading this book, all the pains that were in the background of my life in that shoulder, they were always there, and as I was reading that book, they just disappeared, like they were never there. And I had a father who was an alcoholic, and I started to see him differently, and all of a sudden, he lost that appetite for alcohol, or he finally quit after trying everything, really absolutely everything for many, many years. I was doing personal care work for a woman who was chronically ill, and I shared with her what I was learning in Christian Science, and within a few months, she was up out of her bed, doing so well, and it was an incredible turnaround, and she was someone who had really tried everything, exhausted the medical field, tried every alternative therapy. And it was this Christian Science prayer that brought her satisfactory well-being. Now, after I saw some of those things, I started to go to a Christian Science church. Church really is, it's getting a bad rap these days, even after this pandemic, this worldwide pandemic that we've had. Not a lot of people are going back to church as much as they used to. But church is a profound thing. Through attending Christian Science services, I've been so inspired. The Christian Science churches around the world, they offer a Wednesday night testimony meeting where people go and they hear some readings from the Holy Bible, and then they hear ideas from this book, Science and Health, Key to the Scriptures, that helps unlock the spiritual meaning to the Bible. This book really is a commentary about the Bible and helps explain how to have that same mind that was also in Christ Jesus that it talks about in the book of Philippians, the letter to the Philippians in the Bible. Well, I once went to a Christian Science service. It was around the block from where I was living at the time. And so I was in college. I went to this service. I was new to Christian Science, and I was listening to these wonderful readings that someone was reading. And it was a quiet, solemn occasion. People, you could tell they were really reflecting, trying to understand more about God and how that can affect their life and their family, their community, how it could benefit them. And those readings that day were really about heaven And what's interesting is when you read the Bible, I've read the Bible cover to cover a couple times. And in fact, I've read this particular Bible cover to cover. And if you read the Bible, there's a lot of surprising things in here that you might not expect. And one of those things is that it never says in the Bible, you go to heaven when you die. When Jesus talked about heaven, he said that heaven is here. He says it's within you. He said it's at hand. My hand is right here. And he talked about the kingdom of heaven essentially being the consciousness of God. Heaven, is the idea of this perfect place with God. But if you read in the book of Psalms in the Bible, 139, for example, it says, even if I make my bed in hell, hell is something we make of our own discordant, dysfunctional, ignorant of God thinking. Even if I make my bed in hell, thou art there. God is there. So if heaven is God with us, that's true right in this moment. The concept of God is that which is omnipresent, omnipotent. It's what's everywhere and all-powerful. Now, this concept of God, a lot of times people will say, well, I don't believe God, or maybe I've never felt God in such a way that makes me believe in God more than material reality. But when I use this word God, as it's explained in Christian Science, that God is actually life itself. We're all living in life, aren't we? We're all in life together. We're all of life together. And if you think about any moment you've ever really felt close to life, really at one with life, maybe you look into somebody's eyes and this sense of separation just dissolves and you feel in love because there's this perfect moment of oneness, of wholeness, of belonging, being at home. Well, that's a moment of love. And life, correctly understood, is love. That's why you feel so right when you feel in love in one way or another. And of course, love is not just between people. Maybe you're walking out in nature and you just feel at home with the trees and the sunlight. You feel a sense of belonging, peace. And that's real life you're feeling when you feel that love. Love is life. The Bible says God is love. Real love is life. That's what I'm talking about when I say this word God. So God with us, life with us, love with us. That's what I was feeling in that service that day. I felt that the kingdom of heaven, this love governing me, was at hand, was real. And it felt like all the visions of darkness and discord that I had in my thought just weren't there anymore because everything was illuminated by the one true thing, the life that is love. Now, let me share an analogy with you to help you maybe grasp this. When we're on the earth, if you look up at the sun, you could say the sun is the source of light and life in our universe. And you could say the sun, when you look at it, it's shining sometimes, but then it dips behind the horizon and it's not shining other times. We have night and day, right? You see the sun shining sometimes, you don't see it shining sometimes. And you see that the sun is revolving around the earth. When you're on the earth, you look up at the sun, it's going around us. You see it sometimes, you don't see it sometimes. You also see a sunrise. You see it like real small and it grows up, matures, you could say. In the middle of the day, it's shining the brightest, and then it eventually has a sunset and goes away. Now, imagine if you got a different viewpoint. Imagine if you were to stand on the sun, for example, and you were to look out from the sun. Maybe you were born on the sun, and if you looked out from the sun, you would only see light. The concept of darkness would be unknown to you, and you would see the earth revolving around the sun. Now, one of those perspectives is true, and the other is false. In other words, if you're standing on the earth and you see the sun revolving around the earth, is that what's really going on? No, it's actually the exact opposite. If you were able to stand on the sun, you would see the earth revolving around the sun, and that's what's actually happening. The earth is orbiting the sun. That's the correct perspective. Now, this is the harder one. You might say, of course, yes, the earth is orbiting the sun, but when you look at the sun from the earth's vantage point, you see it shining sometimes, and you don't see it shining other times. You see night when it's not shining. You see day when it is shining. Now, if you were standing on the sun, you would only see day, so to speak. You'd only see light all the time. The concept of darkness would be unknown to you. Now, what is the correct perspective there? The correct perspective is the one from the sun's point of view. Because from the earth, it seems that the sun is only shining half the time, but from the sun's perspective, you would see it shining all the time, and the concept of darkness would be unknown to you. Now, what Christian Science teaches is that since God is life, and this life is love, and God is the only creator, all is love. Now, the reason why we don't see love sometimes, we see love and we see hate, is because we're viewing things from the wrong perspective, from what you could call an earthly perspective, or a carnal or biological or limited or myopic perspective. You're looking at things from the wrong point of view, from a selfish point of view, you could say, a self-centered point of view, instead of a God-centered point of view. But what Christian Science does is it helps us see things out from God's point of view, where darkness is unknown, and light and love are the reality of being, and that all that you see is illuminated by the source of life, which is God. So I was getting the sense of that in that Christian Science service that day. Now I walked out of there and I felt different, fundamentally different than I normally felt. I didn't feel like there was good and bad in the world, and love and hate in the world, and health and disease in the world. I felt that all was love and health and goodness. And if I didn't see it right away, it was because I was viewing things from a wrong perspective. But walking out of that church, I was full of that right perspective. I was full of this God way of viewing life. I was so full of this understanding of God that when I looked out at things, I just saw love everywhere. It was an amazing feeling and experience. Now, I walked around the corner, and right outside my apartment, I just lived right around the corner from this church, there was two big men. And they weren't necessarily homeless people, but they were people who like to kind of hang out on the streets, probably for nefarious reasons. And there were these two big guys, and they were in a fist fight, and one had just clocked the other in the face. And he was bleeding, and it was this graphic scene of violence, of hate, also probably caused by depression, maybe even suicidal thoughts. Now, when I looked at that, even though I saw that on the surface, I knew that wasn't the truth from a higher perspective. Now, often in life, we see things from this earthly standpoint that gives us a wrong view of life. So, for example, if you were standing on the earth and looking out from the earth's point of view, you would, see a flat earth. Right? But if you lifted yourself up all the way outside the atmosphere altogether into outer space, so to speak, such a high perspective, you would look down on the earth and see it's a spheroid. In the same way that when life seems to fall flat with hatred or sickness, sin, dis-ease, when we lift ourselves up in prayer to get a higher view, and I think this was what Jesus was doing, we can see that wholeness and health and beauty ever present. And it really seems like from our earthly point of view that the earth is flat. In the same way, it really seems like hatred and disease and discord are real, are substantial. But from a higher point of view, you see that truth. Now, I was full of that higher point of view from that Christian Science service. So when I looked at these two men who were in the fight and that graphic scene of violence, I felt so full of love that something very interesting happened. I just felt moved by divine compassion. Often, when you read the Bible about Jesus, often before he brought healing to someone, there's either this phrase explicitly or some kind of understanding put forth to bring out this idea that Jesus was moved with compassion, with a love beyond himself, by God. He was moved by God, by divine love itself. And I felt myself just moved to help this situation. And I found myself just running towards these two men. and I grabbed one of them and I flipped him around, even though he was a lot bigger and stronger than me. And I grabbed him by the arm and I just walked away. And immediately I started to share these simple and beautiful ideas that this man was a good man. I said to him, "You're loved. You're cared for. You don't want to hurt anyone. You're a good man." And he started to quiet down, and these ideas started to sink into him. He started to listen to me. And eventually we walked a ways and we ended up in an ATM. We sat down in an ATM together. And in the presence of this goodness, these good ideas that I got in that service and that I was carrying forward, and they were moving me to bring out harmony naturally, this man, in the presence of all this goodness, it was like a chemicalization. Like if you're in a chemistry lab and a purity is introduced to a chemical solution that has impurities in it, often all of them come to the top just to be wiped away. And all of a sudden, all this guck started to come out of this man, all these negative ideas that he was holding in his thought, all these dark thoughts, because darkness cannot exist in the presence of light. Remember, looking out from the sun, the concept of darkness unknown. All these dark ideas just started to be, you could say, expelled from his consciousness or life. He started to talk about how he was abused as a child and all this difficulty in his life. And as it was coming out, you could kind of feel kind of the freedom that was filling that void, that freedom that's always there, that goodness that was always there. And after he spoke for a while, he just took a deep sigh, as if it's just all out of me now. And he looked at me in the eyes and he said, "I love you." And this was just this tough guy on the streets. And all of a sudden, you could see his demeanor had just totally changed. And now he grabbed me by the hand and he started to walk me back to where that fight had began. And when we got there, that man who I think had started the fight with him was still there. And he said, I forgive you. Will you forgive me? And they embraced together. And it was this beautiful moment of reconciliation, unity, love. And then we sat down together, and that guy who I think had started the fight, he realized there had been a wonderful transformation that had just happened, and he started to ask me questions. And the same thing started to happen to him. And I would say that the element of the Christ, that power and love and truth behind the life of Jesus, was present in that situation. That's what was speaking to me in that Christian Science service that day. That's what was moving me. And Jesus, he looked at everyday people like you and I and said, "You guys are going to do the same things that I've done, even greater." And he said, "Because I go to God." And a lot of people, interpreted that on the surface, thinking, well, he's going to God, and maybe we need to take up the mantle, and maybe that's partly true. But I think there's a deeper metaphysical claim there that Jesus was making, that he was drawing on God, the one source of life, and that same source of life is our source of life. Sometimes when you read the Bible and you go to Christian churches, you might get a sense that Jesus is very different than us. But if you take a very deep read of the Bible, even though Jesus was unique and came as the full expression of the perfect individual and is a pure transparency to God, the Bible not only says that Jesus was the light of the world, but Jesus said we are the light of the world if we follow his teachings. And you might think, well, Jesus was the Son of God. But when you read the Bible, it says we too are the sons and daughters of God. And you might say, well, Jesus really was the image, the very likeness of God. And when I read the Bible, I get that picture. But the very first page of the Bible says each and every one of us, image and likeness of God. So we're made to be like Jesus. And Jesus really is the way shower. He showed us how to think and live and love in a way that brings out harmony. And that begins with this concept that everything comes from one source, true monotheism, the light and the love that is life itself. So, as I spoke to that second man and all that guck came out of him, all those negative ideas, it's the same kind of process. He started to share his difficulties, and it all kind of came out, and he, in a similar way, just sort of took a sigh at the end of that, just feeling his own wholeness, his own beauty, his own completeness. You could tell that he felt that. And he looked at me and he said, "I love you." And these two guys on the street, they didn't know anything about me. They weren't loving personal Nate, of course. They were loving what you could call the Christ, that truth and love behind the life of Jesus that I was learning about in that service and that was moving me. And, you know, in that Christian Science service, I really wasn't adding anything to my being or understanding of life in a way. I was actually just getting rid of false ideas, and then I experienced that love and that goodness underneath everything. I was clearing out these earthly or limited viewpoints, and I was just allowing the truth to shine in me and through me. It was a wonderful experience. And to me, it really speaks to that power of monotheism. That's the key thing. That's the key thread that ties the Bible together. You know, a lot of times people think about the Bible and they might think of it, oh, this book it's an old book. It's kind of dogmatic. It's just about outdated morality, that sort of thing. If you read the whole thing and you really take in what it's saying, it's an incredibly diverse book written by people of all different statuses, you know, young, old, rich, poor, people who lived in different regions, people who spoke different languages even. And it's written over, 1,000 or 2,000 year period, really, maybe even more. And there's all different kinds of literature. Some is history books, there's poetry, there's letters, like you're reading people's mail. There's 4 biographies of the most wonderful and influential man who ever lived, Jesus, who was pure transparency to God. And the Bible really, it's kind of an evolution of people understanding this true idea of monotheism. That's the one idea that kind of binds together all the books in the Bible, this concept there really is one source, one cause to life. And it's revealed in the New Testament that this is love. And Jesus really defined what love is. And I've always wanted to look up the word love in the dictionary and see the definition, see the life of Jesus. I think that would be the best definition of all. And Jesus, it's interesting, you know, if you study history, many historians think Jesus was the most influential person who ever lived on the history of human thought and life. And in many accounts, he's still the most known person in the world. And you might say, okay, that's interesting. If he's the most influential person, most known person, you know, what was his profession? You know, was he someone who was trying to change things through technological means or medical means? Was he a politician? In fact, Jesus didn't do any of those things at all. He wasn't trying to find solutions through technology or material medicine or through rearranging governmental policies. He saw a way to benefit people's lives directly and to benefit the world that could make a difference more than anything. And that was through the process of prayer. You could say Jesus was a professional prayer. Prayer. That's what he did. He walked around and right where people were struggling, he did this mental thing called prayer. Now, what is it? What did he do? There's this ubiquitous image of prayer that people have all around the world. If you ask somebody to pray, you'd probably get this image of someone who's down on their knees, their hands folded, and their eyes closed. And it's interesting. This image, it's just so incredibly ubiquitous. I've been to all different countries in the world. I've been, to services of people who have different forms of Christianity and different faiths around the world, and you see this image pop up again and again. Something so ingrained in consciousness that this symbol connotes prayer. And of course there's variations, but what is it to be down on one's knees, eyes closed, hands folded, that has to do with prayer? Now, the Bible says we should pray without ceasing, implying it's something we can and should do all the time. And yet, even though prayer has nothing to do with that physical position, you know, you can be snowboarding or driving your car or or talking to a friend, you can always be praying. Prayer is really a perspective we're holding on life. It's a way of living. And, Jesus, when he was first teaching, he called his teachings the way. It's a way of thinking and being in the world. It's the right way. And just a little note on that word right, the right way. Often when we see harmony and love and goodness, imagine you're having the best day of your life, you would say everything is going right. When harmonious things are happening, loving things are happening, when you see life abounding around you. But conversely, if you saw disease, difficulty, dismay, unfortunate accidents of chance, you would say everything is going wrong if you saw that stuff. Now, that intuition that we all have, that accident, injury, death, you could say sin or wrong thinking, is wrong, and that love and peace and unity and intelligence working together for good, that's right. That, I think, is the basis of the way that Jesus thought. He knew that what is loving is right. Why is that so? Well, if you read this book, Science and Health, Key to the Scriptures, helps bring out that spiritual meaning of the Bible, you learn that another word for God that's used in this book a lot is principle. There's that the principle is God, that principle is love. Love is the principle of life. If love is the principle of life, then what is hateful is not true, because it's not the principle of life. Now, so often we think about life in this duality. We think that, okay, right and wrong exists. Wrong is true. We see it in the world. It's true. But if we really think through this, if someone was designing a building and they were holding a wrong mathematical equation in thought, 9 times 9 equals 99 instead of 81 or something, as they were building their building, if they're holding wrong mathematical principles, maybe they're working on 2x4s and 2 times 4 equals 6 instead of 8, that building would come crashing down. And it's not because of any inherent real opposition to God, any real Satan or evil out there. It would be an ignorance of God. And this book, Science and Health, there's a wonderful line in it that says, "It is our ignorance of God, the divine principle, which produces apparent discord, and the right understanding of Him restores harmony." The right understanding of God restores harmony. And so what Christian Science reveals is that when you see evil or hatred or dis-ease in any form, it's not a substance in itself. It's always an ignorance or a lack of understanding of God, which is the source of only love and harmony and peace, true intelligence. And one of the things that's so wonderful about studying Christian Science is that if it's true that our ignorance of God produces apparent discord, and the right understanding of God restores harmony, then the most important thing of all would be that question, well, what is God? How do I know God? And this book, it really unpacks God. It says that God is incorporeal, meaning not in any body or form, but divine, supreme, infinite mind, spirit, soul, principle, life, truth, love. Earlier today I was actually talking to a friend about God, about infinite consciousness or mind, the infinite mind that is God. And they were kind of saying, well, why isn't God in one form? And I was talking and using this analogy of a TV. If you were to watch a TV, the TV screen can transform into any form and doesn't hold on to any one form as its truth. Imagine if you had a TV screen that just showed, your favorite actor or actress on it, and you switched channels, and that same form was just stuck on the screen there in the middle because I love this form. and this is the form that I am as the TV. You would say, well, no, 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 I don't want that form. I've switched channels. Get that form out of my view. I'm onto the new channel, right? And God, as infinite consciousness, it can express itself through myriad of forms. And it's not limited to any one form because it's formless. It's infinite mind. And, to the infinite mind that's love, anything is impossible and all is loving. And God can bring the right form into our life that fits any situation. And sometimes in our own thought, we're stuck on some form that we love. I love this house or this job or, this particular way I looked at this point in my life or something like that. But as we pray, the right forms to make us feel whole and love and good come into our experience. They often come, in the form of the right thoughts to think, right ways to act. Since we're an expression of the infinite mind, the truth is we're not limited to form in any way. Form as we normally think about it is matter. Matter is the idea that life and intelligence, goodness, all that we love, it's locked into a form or a body. And that, when that body dies, all that stuff that we love dies with it, because form is what is real, right? And that intelligence, love, it's all caused by different formations. You get the right neurons or right cells together, then maybe life and intelligence are formed. But that's not how it works. When I'm speaking to you right now, I have a thought. There's a thought that comes, and then that thought is expressed through form in a way that you can understand. There's words that come out. Those are forms. My hands move, my lips move, and all this these are forms that help understand that idea. It starts with idea, right? And that idea, it moves my body. It moves this form, right? It comes in a form you can understand. Now, right now, in our own understanding, the form that we understand best is through human body and through words. And those are forms that right now are appearing to us because that's how we can understand things. But as we progress, more beautiful forms, more ethereal forms will appear to us to help communicate and so forth. Well, I want to share with you another healing right now to help bring out some of these ideas and help give you a fuller sense of God and how this Christian Science healing works. Now, to do this, I want to bring you halfway around the world, out to the Himalayas. When I was young and praying about things, I wanted to see the world. I wanted to get out in the mountains, and I traveled halfway around the world and went out to the Himalayas, beautiful area of the world, and just started to do one high altitude hike after the next. Now, the problem was I had this serious issue with altitude sickness. I mean, this is something that people deal with. When you get up to high altitude, it's harder to breathe, and often people don't feel well. But for me, it was much more extreme. I was doing one hike after the next, but the symptoms which I was experiencing were really debilitating. They were just making me so ill I couldn't do anything. And now every single time I had these two books with me. I had my Bible, and I had this book that helped me understand the teachings of the Bible, Science and Health. And reading these two books really brought a sense of comfort that transcended human reason. To paraphrase, if you read the Bible, the book of John, Jesus essentially said, I'm not going to be with you forever, but that's all right. I'm going to send you a comforter. He talked about it as the Spirit of Truth. And he implied it was something that would help people understand his teachings and live them. And when Mary Baker Eddy uncovered the science of Christ, or the truth and love behind the life of Jesus, she really felt it was a fulfillment, this inevitable evolution and fulfillment, unfolding of good that Jesus knew would come. And as I had these books with me, I just felt this divine comforter with me as I read and thought about these spiritual ideas that these two books were bringing to life. And every single time I prayed with some of these ideas, I felt deeply, deeply transformed and healed. And this prayer really was that prayer position. You could say everything that prayer position I noted earlier, everything it symbolized was really at the heart of this. I was getting down on my knees mentally. What does that represent? Jesus said, I can of my own self do nothing. In other words, my own ego, my own mind, material, limited mind. But he said, but with God, all things are possible. I can of my own self do nothing. Most important man who ever lived said that. Well, he knew that all power comes from the one source, that's God. And so the ego or the human mind can't be a separate source. It can only reflect, if anything, that first and fundamental source. So we're intelligent because we reflect or express God, not because we have an intelligence or love of our own. So prayer is really getting down on our knees, wiping our slate clean of any limited perspective that we might have, and listening for that infinite mind, beginning to express infinite love. Because love is infinite, you can never run out of it. If I share one loving idea with you and another loving idea with you, and I love somebody in one way today and another love, I won't just realize, oh, I'm all out of love. No, just the opposite. The more you love, the more you realize that love is everywhere. The more you recognize the ever-presence of love, that love is life. And conversely, the view of life as material is the very opposite. That's what causes problems in life. If people think that love or value is in a person, if you lose the one you love, you'll feel without love. If you lose some money, you'll feel not valuable anymore. But when you realize that love and value and so forth come from within us, that heaven is within us, it's the consciousness of true value, true love, then you can start to see it in the right form in your life. And even if you lose the form that you love or that you value, those qualities are within you and will inevitably, as you express them, as you cherish them, as you understand more about God being the source of all value and love, you'll see that you're the very expression of God in a needed way, and you'll be led to the right forms. The infinite mind can always bring the right form into your life that can help bring out value and love, whether it's the right thought or the right manifestation of something. Well, in this particular example, when I was dealing with that altitude sickness, and I really started to pray, not only did I get humble, I started to close my eyes. Jesus said we should pray in a closet. I think he was meaning to block out any negative images or thoughts that we might have, any limiting thoughts or images, to really connect and understand and express that infinite love, infinite intelligence, infinite soul, source of all beauty, artistry, goodness. And lastly, there's that hands coming together in prayer and that symbol. And for me, again, that sense of dualism. It seems so real in life. Light and dark, good and bad, life and death. And yet in prayer, there's this oneness, and often a pleading to understand it more, a reaching out to God for more understanding of that oneness. What did Jesus say? I and my Father are two, but when I pray, we're relatively close. No. He said, I and my Father are one. And we're at one with God. And God is never separate from us. The love and infinite intelligence that is life, never separate from us. We're always at one with it. So as I was praying about that altitude sickness stuff, every time when I had it, I prayed with these two books. Wonderful things happened. But at the end of my journey, I was taking a 6-month journey, kind of a coming-of-age journey in my 20s. I spent most of the time out there in the Himalayas. And I went to take a month-long mountaineering course to cap my journey. And I took this course, and right before entering it, the day it was starting, it said, you have to go to this doctor to get examined. I didn't know this was going to happen. And the doctor examined me. He said, you're in great shape. You've clearly been training for this, but you failed the blood exam. He said, I looked into your blood samples. There's not enough hemoglobin or oxygen in your red blood cells for you to be healthy at those high altitudes. You're certainly going to get sick. And he talked it through, gave it more labels. And he was just explaining and labeling what I had experienced already time and time again. But when that happened, I really put my foot down mentally. It was as if, okay, I've been praying with this kind of half-heartedly, but it's either true or not. In the Bible, there's always these There's so many parables that Jesus gives about, there's two perspectives and you have to choose the one entirely and burn up the other, whether it's with, the chaff and the wheat. You need to harvest the one and burn the other. Or, he says there's two men in the field, only one can be taken. He's not talking about some apocalyptic thing like you see in these modern movies. I think he was talking about there's a spiritual conception of us and there's a material conception of us that we hold in thought. Only one can be taken into heaven. Only one can be true and can bring us to the harmony and that one-ment with God that we desire. And that's the spiritual vision of us. That's the from God perspective. When I talked about the sun and the earth, you get the true picture of things if you are able to look out from the sun's point of view. You don't get the right picture from that earthly perspective, from that mortal, you could say, that temporary perspective. Well, another way to look at that analogy I shared earlier is when you see the sun rising. You imagine thousands of years ago, people knew nothing about astronomy, nothing about even the earth being a sphere, anything like that. And imagine when they saw the sun just start to come up and then it start to rise and get bigger and bigger, stronger in the middle of the day. And then it started to decay and get smaller, and eventually it sets and there's just darkness. And then the next day it repeats. They might think, the sun is being reborn every day. It gets born, it's tiny, it's barely shining, and then it comes up, it's shining bright, it gets old, and then eventually it goes away, right? And that actually mirrors the human life cycle. We're born, there's a lot of promise, but our light's not shining brightly at first, not a lot of productivity and things. And later in life, as we mature, we become more productive. Maybe our light's shining, so to speak, make a bigger difference in the world, productivity and so forth. And then we get older, and eventually we sort of dip behind the horizon, so to speak. People, and someone passes on, we don't see them anymore. But from God's point of view, all those cycles, from the higher point of view, just like when you lift yourself up, say, outside of the Earth's atmosphere, and you are able to see that the sun is always shining, it's not going through those cycles. In the same way, in our own lives, as we start to perceive ourselves spiritually, we realize we're always shining. We're an eternal, beautiful expression of God. And whatever life cycle we seem to be going through, that's not what's true from God's point of view, from in reality. Now, so when I was praying about that issue with that blood issue, when I was there in the doctor's office, I knew that I was this eternal, beautiful expression of God. And I knew that, as it says at the end of the Bible, behold, I, God, make all things new. I knew this newness was there for me to discover. And I knew that this sickness that I was experiencing was wrong, that there's no principle of sickness. There's just a principle of health. And all dis-ease comes from an ignorance of that principle, ignorance of God. And I really wanted to know more about that. And I just knew it was right for me to take this course. It really felt so right, felt so good. And so I was kind of praying about this, and the doctor realized that I was a good person and I'd come all the way to take this course. And the doctor said, well, what if I just lie for you? You're in good shape. You could take some medicine if you have to up there. You probably can do it. You can always just hike back down if you're struggling. You want me just to say that you passed the course or passed the physical exam? And I didn't want to lie. The Bible says, this is what Jesus says in the Bible, you will know the truth, and the truth will or shall make you free. And this book, The Science and Health, echoes that by saying honesty is spiritual power. So I didn't want to forfeit that spiritual power by being deceitful. And yet, I knew that it wasn't really true about myself, that I was a diseased. You never read in the Bible that you're a diseased expression of God. So I just thought to myself, well, can I just take a walk and pray about this? And I asked the doctor, and he said, of course, come back to me later if you want to talk about this. And so I took a walk, and as I was on that walk, I really started to pray. And I started to think about what Jesus said in the Bible about being the light of the world. And if you saw a light beam, come out of a window, for example, and you started to say bad things to it, you're too bright, you're no good, you got bad blood, you're just this temporary bad thing. No matter what you said to it, it wouldn't change that light beam. If you tried to cut it in half, physically abuse it, pop some pill into it, it wouldn't change its nature. And what if you tried to box it in, sort of materialize it, so to speak? Put it into a box, bring it into another room, open up that box. Would you have caught that sun, captured it in that box? No. You open up that box, that sunbeam wouldn't be in there. That light ray wouldn't be in there. Now, why is that so? It's because every ray of light that comes out from the sun, it's not defined by what you say to it, by what has happened to it previous. You put a pill in it, you whack it, and a moment later it's just shining brand new because it's brand new right out from the sun every moment. You put it into the box, you bring it in another room, open it up, it's not there because it's brand new from its source every moment. Everything in that light beam comes from its source, not from what's materially said about it, its material past, or by a material box that we're trying to box it in by. Well, if we think about our own identity and how we think about ourselves and define ourselves and how our activity is governed in life, we think of it based upon what people have said about us, based upon what's physically happened to us in the past. Maybe there's been some abuse in your life, or someone hurt you, or some bad thing happened physically in the past, and you think you're defined by that. Or you might be boxed in by you're this age, you're this life cycle right now, or you have this history, material history, and it feels like you're boxed in. You're this part of town, you live in this house, whatever it is. And if the Bible's true that we're the light of the world, and that analogy, I think what Jesus was getting through there is that everything that we are comes from one source, and that's God. And when we think about that definition we looked earlier, if God is mind, then we all have this infinite intelligence continually coming through us, really as us. We are the intelligent, beautiful ideas of God. We're all spiritual because we come from spirit. We're all soulful. We have this beauty in us because we come from soul. Everything is right within us because we come from principle. We're all full of life, and there's no death within us. The Bible says that God is the God of life and not of death. God is life itself. That's why. Death is not the opposite of life, but the apparent inability to see life in some certain circumstance. We're all honest. We're all good because we come from truth. We're the expressions of truth. We're all loving because we come from love. And as I was thinking through those different ideas of God and realizing that was my only source, and it really didn't matter what was said about me, my material past. It didn't matter that I got sick in the past. That wasn't the pattern that was defining me. Now, if we think about what science is today to most people, it's about the patterns and regularities of nature. If you take the weather, for example, if you're looking at the science of weather, you would look at the jet streams and how they flow and their patterns and different temperatures, different places in the world. And you could distill all those patterns down to numbers and eventually statistics. And you could say, this is how often these things happen in these times. We do the same thing with disease in the world. You saw this with that worldwide pandemic that people dealt with, we all dealt with. Well, even if you see a pattern of material experience from our limited earthly point of view, that's not ultimate truth. And when Jesus saw difficult patterns, because people in his day were still doing rudimentary science, they saw that, storms came up this time of year, or if a storm came up, they didn't expect it to dissolve, in an instant because the pattern that they saw, the rudimentary science that they were doing in their head, well, this is what generally happens. The storm continues in this kind of way. And so when his disciples were out in a boat with Jesus and a terrible storm came up and they were scared they were going to die out there, Jesus prayed and he stilled the storm. He didn't just look at that pattern and say, oh, well, this storm looks terrible, and what normally happens next is it continues to be terrible, and maybe we're in trouble. No, he prayed, and he broke that false pattern that people were scared about. Fear, there's a little acronym to fear: false evidence appearing real. That's why we have that feeling of wrongness. That's what fear is, that visceral feeling of wrongness. When we see something that's wrong and believe that it has substance, then we feel that emotion we call fear. But fear is a falsity. It's false evidence appearing real. And so even though I had that evidence that I was sick so often with that high altitude, I knew that fear that I have really was about that was false evidence appearing real. And this perfect love that I was learning about, that was my only source. The Bible says perfect love casts out fear. And I felt that fear just being removed from my consciousness as I prayed about what it means to be the light of the world, the light of God. And as I did that, I started to feel this wonderful warmth inside, wonderful goodness. And I felt healthy. I felt healthy inside. And when we have that right understanding, that true conscious idea of life, the body follows us. Our experiences follows us. The forms that we need to see to substantiate, to instantiate that idea follow us. Just like the tail of a dog follows the dog wherever it goes. You ever see a dog kind of try to chase its own tail because he thinks it's something different? Often we're kind of just chasing our own thoughts by looking at the body or our experience and thinking that that's something different than us. What we see is an expression of consciousness. And as we change our thoughts and align them with the infinite mind that's only love and good, we're going to start to see that goodness. Life is the expression of thought made manifest. And when we see it clearly, life is the expression of the infinite mind that's only love. Well, as I was thinking along those lines, praying along those lines, I went back to the doctor. I said, I just feel like I could do this course without any ill effect. And he said, I'll write you a recommendation. I didn't have to lie. Handed it to the people who were running that course. They let me in. When I got up to the high altitude for the first time, I not only did not feel ill, I felt this wonderful sense of health, Mary Baker Eddy once wrote that health is the consciousness of the unreality of pain and disease, or rather the absolute consciousness of harmony and of nothing else. And I felt that not only that consciousness of harmony, but that unreality looking out from that light of God's love of any darkness or any pain or any difficulty. And I felt there's no substance in it at all. And I didn't fear it at all. And I didn't experience it at all. And that healing has been permanent. I've been up to high altitude since and haven't had any irregular experience of altitude sickness. Well, everything I've been talking about today, it really does come right out from the life of Mary Baker Eddy, the discoverer of Christian Science. I'm going to share a few things about her, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So if you have a question, again, you can type that in. You can email me, lectureqa@gmail.com, or write directly into the YouTube chat. So Mary Baker Eddy, she was someone who really brought out the best in people. Often if you look at the history of spirituality and religion, there's this pitfall that a lot of people fall into. It's kind of a cult-like mentality of like worshiping one person because they have the truth and you want to go to them to get the truth. You could imagine, some people are just waiting for another human Messiah. They're waiting for Jesus to come back, for example. Imagine if Jesus did come back. Imagine if he was giving a talk in your town right now. Imagine he was talking in Manchester or in Wakefield, England. And everyone was just rushing to go see Jesus. Huge line. You had to wait in this line for weeks, camp out. You finally get to the front of the line, get your few minutes with Jesus, best moments of your life. And then you would go home and maybe that goodness would start to wear off. You'd start to feel like, well, I just need to get in the presence of Jesus again. Then I'll feel loved. Then I'll feel good. I forgot to ask him this question, right? I don't know the answer. Well, maybe you'd get back in line. You wouldn't feel that love until you got into his presence again. Well, that wouldn't be an experience of God being omnipresent. If love, divine love, God is omnipresent, then the best thing we could do is to learn how to feel it all the time. Now, we can't always be in the presence of one form all the time, nor would we want to. We wouldn't want to have one form in our life all the time. It's good to have a variety of forms evolving in our life in a way that's fitted just for us at the right time. What one really wants, what would be better than just having the form of love to look out upon and learn from, what even is even better than that is what the Bible calls to have the same mind that was also in Christ Jesus. Mind, again, it's God. God is the infinite mind. So we want to have that same divine consciousness that Jesus had, see life as he did. That's even better than occasionally being with him. And Mary Baker Eddy, she really understood this at a deep and profound level. And when she encountered people, she didn't try to get some kind of hypnotic relationship with them where they were worshiping her as the source of good. She, following in Jesus' footsteps, knew that she could of her own self do nothing. And but with God, when you understand God, all things are possible. And that's what Christian Science really is all about. Well, Mary Baker Eddy once said to someone, to depersonalize thought. To personalize thought limits spiritual growth. You know, thought comes from God. It doesn't come from Mary Baker Eddy or from any of us. We all are listening to God. That's what prayer is all about, listening to the infinite mind for those thoughts of good. Well, there's a story I love in this book. It's cataloged in this as well as some other books about a woman named Harriet O'Brien who met Mary Baker Eddy. And this woman, had a very difficult life, had all sorts of health ailments, picked up what's called an iatrogenic ailment, something caused by medical intervention that went awry. And one of her legs was severed by accident. When a ligament was severed by accident, and she was relegated to a wheelchair. She was so ill that she had heart problems, spine issues. She got so sick she stopped speaking correctly, motor movements slowed down, and she felt she was at death's throes in her language. And it was at that point when she was introduced to Christian Science, and a Christian Science practitioner taught by Mary Baker Eddy started to pray for her. And within a short time, she started to see one thing after the next just drop away, and her health just come to the surface in a beautiful way. And she started to think, well, maybe I could even walk again, because that was one thing that kind of stuck around for a while. And she kept praying with this practitioner week after week, month after month. Didn't come quickly, but eventually she got up out of that wheelchair, started to walk normally. Now, it was like she was reborn, right? She went from death's door to all of a sudden feeling this wonderful vibrancy and newness of life. And at that point, she really wanted to meet Mary Baker Eddy, who wrote this wonderful book, who taught this woman. And of course, she was reading and being so inspired by this book, Science and Health. And so she went to meet Mary Baker Eddy once, and it was just a brief encounter. And this is what she wrote about this encounter. Transparency is the word that best expresses my impression of Mrs. Eddy. Instinctively, I felt her great love, and I was conscious that no one I had ever seen loved me as much as she did. My entire thought was filled with a spiritual illumination, and there was a glory in the sunshine and landscape as though a breath of heaven had swept earth and enveloped me. Sounds like a good day, right? I know if I experienced that, I might think to myself, well, I want to go see Mary Baker Eddy again. She was the person who loved me more than anyone, right? But that was not the effect that she had on people. She didn't make this kind of master-servant relationship with people. I'm so great, worship me. She was learning from Jesus. Jesus washed other people's feet and brought out the best in them, really believed in them. Just everyday people. He looked at them and said, you guys are going to do the same things that I did and even greater. And Mary Baker Eddy felt that about her students. These people, they don't need to rely on me for healing. They can be healers themselves. Well, Harriet O'Brien said she had a question in her heart when she met Mary Baker Eddy. And that question was, can I be a healer too? Can I help people in the way that I've been helped? Because she felt that love. She felt that love was radiating, was everywhere, and she felt compassion on people for not knowing that or being aware or feeling that. And so the moment she met Mary Baker Eddy, she said that question that she had in her heart was answered. And she hopped on a train shortly after, went back to her hometown in Kansas City in America, in the USA, and she started a practice of Christian Science healing. She was in the Christian Science Journal for over 50 years. She left a wonderful record of healing. She said on several occasions she helped people who were in a similar condition to her, apparently dying of a disease that was incurable, raised to a life, through Christian Science prayer, raised to a life of health and harmony. Well, isn't that wonderful? So if that woman could do it, any of us can do it too. There really is a science, an understanding, a know-how to how prayer brings healing, and that's what this book is all about. So I hope you all read this book. And at this point, I'm just going to open it up to questions. If you have any questions from this lecture so far, we'll answer a few questions, and then I'll add a few thoughts and wrap it up. So let's see what has come in. Somebody is asking just about Scientology, that those have similar words. Is there some correlation? There is not. Christian Science has no affiliation with Scientology at all. There's similar sounding words. Christian Science is based upon the Bible and the life and teachings of Christ Jesus. That's one of the ways that it is different than Scientology. I'm not a scholar of Scientology, so I don't want to speak out of turn here, try to describe someone else's faith or their own practices. I wouldn't want someone to do that for me, to describe it in a way that is not true or not satisfactorily to one's own practice. So I won't say anything about Scientology, but what Christian Science is as I've been talking about it, it's not something really new. It's shedding a new light on the truth that's already in the Bible. The Bible has the full and complete expression of love through the life of Christ Jesus. The Bible is just it's kind of this build up that all just kind of burst into reality in the life of Jesus. Many wonderful experiences all throughout the Bible, but there's this yearning for the Savior, that which really will save us from life's difficulties. And Jesus proved that the power of love can overcome not only sin or wrong thinking and disease, but even the concept and experience of death itself. And Jesus was all about the understanding that life is eternal. And so that it comes into living color in the life of Jesus. But Christian Science, it's the explanation of how to have that same mind that was also in Christ Jesus, how to heal like him. And there's no relationship between that teaching and the teachings of Scientology. Okay, let's see what else. Someone else is asking about that story that I told about up top, about that man who was healed on the streets there, actually two men there who are healed, who are violently fighting. And they're asking if you need permission to pray for someone like that. It seems like I just prayed for them, without permission. Now, sometimes if you were to call a Christian Science practitioner, there are practitioners all around the world. You can check that out on jsh.christianscience.com. You can also find church services near you. I hope you all join a Wednesday night service someday. A Sunday service is wonderful too. And that particular healing, I would say when you think of prayer, there's no off button to prayer. It's always right to view things from God's point of view and to be moved by love and compassion. But in Christian Science practice, it's also it tries to live up to the highest standard of ethics. And Mary Baker Eddy gives an example of you wouldn't go into somebody's house and clean it up, even if it was dirty, without their permission. You wouldn't kind of break into their house. In a similar way, when someone asks you to pray for them, you're giving a Christian Science practitioner permission for them to move your thoughts, to clean your thoughts, so to speak. Now, in general, you want to ask permission to do that. You don't want to go around trying to move people's thoughts without them wanting you to do so. But when Mary Baker Eddy talks about this, she always talks about the golden rule. do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And of course, you want to listen to be moved by God to do what's right in any scenario. And so sometimes you might find yourself being moved by God to say something to someone that's very helpful and good. Maybe it's not even something you know why it's going to be good. It's just something that God compels you to share. It's happened to me many times, as I'm praying. Sometimes I'm compelled to call somebody or say something to somebody, and I don't even know why this is going to be helpful to them, but it ends up just time and time again being exactly what they need to hear. And so, there are no formulas in Christian Science. So we have to listen to what's right in a certain circumstance. In general, we want to ask permission for someone to pray for someone. But sometimes it's following the golden rule and our inspiration from God to share something with somebody and to bring goodness to someone. For example, if I was in an accident, for example, and I was knocked unconscious, I wouldn't want to wait for somebody for me to revive, to ask me if they could pray for me. I would certainly want somebody to go up there and to pray for me right away, and there's no conflict there at all. So in certain circumstances, it's the most ethical thing, the most right thing to do, to pray for somebody, help someone right away without permission. In other words, that's not the most right thing to do in that certain circumstance. But we do try to follow the highest standard of ethics in Christian Science, prayer. If you call a practitioner, confidentiality is very important. You can share with somebody your deepest struggles, and they won't share it with anyone. And it is that highest sense of ethical good, as God is good itself, love itself. So the most loving and good thing is what we try to do through the practice of Christian Science. Okay, so let's see if there's any other questions that came in. I don't see one, but I did have a question that was asked to me recently just about how to pray about supply and about, getting through life if you don't have enough money or enough good around you. How do you pray about that sort of thing? Well, one thing I found is to really value yourself. You're an expression of infinite intelligence, infinite love, and to pinpoint in your thought wherever that appears not to be, just shine the light of good on there. You might think, well, I'm not that intelligent because of this, and you realize that excuse is not true, because it's not. Is that an idea that comes from God? Is that true about God? Therefore, it's not true about you. And just like you can love and love and love, and you realize there's more love, you can express intelligence. How can I express more intelligence today? It might lead you to reading something, to learn more, to be helpful in one way or another. Might lead us humbly to some kind of job we can take to learn some skill. But we want to pray in such a way that we value ourselves as this infinite, valuable entity of God. And we have infinite intelligence and love within us. And then, like that analogy I shared at the beginning, we don't judge upon what we see on the material surface of how much good there is at the moment. We find where good comes from, that infinite tap or source of good. And we let our cup overflow by getting right next to that source and let it pour in. And Mary Baker Eddy talks about flood tides of love, often needed in prayer. And so we just want to shower ourselves, baptize ourselves in the presence of God. And we can do that often by praying and starting and really recognizing deeply and humbly and thoroughly that there really is only one source, one cause to life, and getting to know what that life, what that love is. And again, I found it so helpful in my own life to study this book, Science and Health, Key to the Scriptures, to help me do that. Well, I want to conclude today with one last healing. Some years ago, I was praying about, how could I be more valuable in life? How can I give back more? How can I love more? And I was just moved to go to a prison near where I lived at the time in Boston. And I went into that prison and I started to share with them, the inmates there, some of the ideas that I'm sharing with you today. Now, one day I went there and I was all prayed up, and I had, just moved everything in my schedule. I wanted to dedicate it to praying for these people in this prison, to helping them. And I was so excited for it. And I was like, I'm going to make a big difference today. And I get there and only 2 people showed up. And at first I was like, oh, are you kidding me? There's only 2. I thought the difference meant a lot of people. I thought I needed a lot of people to make a big difference. But you don't need a lot of people in church. You don't need a lot of people in your life to make a difference. Jesus worked with people one-on-one often. One gave people their full attention, even if it was just one person who seemed to be meaningless in the world's eyes. He gave them their full attention, whether it was just a tax collector everyone hated, or some adulterous woman, or somebody who had been married many times and was just aloof in life, and he just gave everyone his full attention that he was guided to by God. And so I had those 2 people before me, and I thought, okay, I'm going to give them my full attention, my full love. I'm going to make a difference. Doesn't matter the numbers. Christianity has always been about the few and the faithful, and I want to hone in on these people in front of me. And I started to share with one of these, with both men, and I started to read them the Christian Science Bible lesson. It takes citations from the Bible and related passages from Science and Health. And as I was reading them, the younger guy especially was like, hey, Nate, I'm listening. And he was really tuned in. But he was like, I'm not some child of God, some manifestation of divine infinite love. You don't know who I am, apparently. I'm a bad person. My father, criminal, grandfather, criminal. I think it's just in my blood. Well, I said to him, I got a story about blood for you. And I told him about that healing of that blood condition I shared with you earlier. But more importantly, I shared with him that light beam analogy. And I shared with him that God is his only source. And that if God is love, he's loving. If he's hateful towards someone, he's going to feel wrong. He's going to feel bad because it's literally wrong. When Jesus said, call no man on earth your father, he wasn't anti-family. He was talking about a metaphysical principle, that God is our father. In other words, our source. That we're the image and likeness of God, not the image and likeness of our human father or human grandfather. It's not about the DNA, the human DNA that creates us. It's about our spiritual DNA, so to speak. It's about what we are as a result of what God is. And so I started to unpack that through Christian Science for him. God is principle. Therefore, everything has to be right within you. You're an honest man because God is truth. There's that goodness within you. Right? God is soul, so you have that beauty within you. You're a beautiful man, a good man. You can have those creative ideas within you because God is infinite mind, always supplying the right idea to fit your need, right in the form that you need it. Well, as we talk through that, you could see the light bulbs going off for him, like he had never thought about life like this. And it was as if he was saying, if this is true, maybe my whole life can be different. Maybe I'm not who I am because of the gang that I was in or because of my father. Maybe who I am is the result of what God is. And maybe that will give me a whole different picture and experience of life. Well, he went back to his jail and he had those 2 books with him, Bible and Science and Health. He had taken those with him. He started to get his nose in those, ardently study those books. And about 6-7 weeks later, I come back to the same prison, same area of the prison. And this time there's a big crowd, and he's in the back of it with his arms over these guys, like, these are my buddies. And, it was so cool. We got going quickly, so I didn't get to talk to him. But the whole service there, I was just eyeing him. And he just had this beautiful grin on his face. Looked like he was on cloud 9. Looked like he was just totally different person. This winsome smile, just radiating joy and contentment and love and peace. And at the end of it, he just sauntered up to me nice and slow, and he said, Nate, I got a testimony for you. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, well, when I came into this jail, I had been diagnosed with lung cancer. And when I heard over the intercom all those weeks ago that you were giving a healing service, that's why I came. And he said, I started to hear all those ideas that you shared, and I don't know what happened, but all of my symptoms just disappeared. My buddies were saying, oh, it's a relapse. You just wait a while. It'll come back. I waited a week and another week and another week, never came back. He had eventually canceled his appointment for surgery. And there he was in front of me as this paragon of health, this shining example of what it means to be a child of God. If you haven't read your Bible in a while, Matthew 5, 6, 7, Sermon on the Mount, wonderful place to start. I call it Jesus' greatest hits because it's often thought of by scholars as this collection of Jesus' most salient and supreme teachings. And those begin with this idea of the Beatitudes, these attitudes that we must be and live. And this attitude of being a peacemaker, of being humble and meek and striving for what is right. And that was all just, the image of that was right in front of me as this man. He was being the image of God, the image of this meekness and humility and peacemaking and love and receptivity and goodness and transparency to divine love. And it was awesome. And he got quiet and he said, "Now, do you think this could help me in other areas of my life?" And I hope you have seen in this lecture that as you take in this truth that I'm sharing, this simple but infinitely profound truth that monotheism is true, and you start to understand God in this beautiful way that Christian Science helps reveal, you can see that this truth, once taken in consciously, once you look at life out from God, every arena in your life will become more healthy, more intelligent, more beautiful. It's natural for that to be so. And so there's no area of your life that can't be improved through understanding more about God and expressing God. So I just want to close today with this little line from Science Health. It's the very first line. It says, "The prayer that reforms the sinner and heals the sick, an absolute faith that all things are possible to God, a spiritual understanding of him, and unselfed love." The whole book really explains more about this line. And I think this whole lecture you just heard, it's about this line too. How do we have this trust in God that's based upon spiritual understanding, or faith in God based upon spiritual understanding and real unselfed love? And if you think of it, this is what makes a great relationship in life. Any one you're relating to, if you have an absolute faith in them, you really seek to understand who they are and you really love them, that's going to make for a great relationship. And if we want to have a great relationship with God, with life itself, what's needed is to really have absolute faith, trust in that life, to understand what divine infinite life is, and then to be the living expression of the life that is love in a truly unselfed way. So I hope you learned something about that today. I hope you learned something about Christian Science. Again, a big thanks to the sponsors of this event, Fourth Church of Christ Scientist in Manchester, England, and the Christian Science Society in Wakefield, England. You can check out a replay of this event at fccsmcr.org. That's First Church of Christ Scientist, Manchester.org. And to everyone listening, I just want to thank you for being you. You're a beautiful expression of God, and you can let your light shine brightly. I hope you're having a wonderful day or night wherever you're listening to this. God bless.